to see that you are all in today. As we wait for a few members to get in, I'm still seeing people streaming in. Let us remain patient as we wait for them. We have a very important announcement to make as we begin. So let us remain patient. I can see a few people are struggling to join their audio, and I'm very happy that you are here getting in. Thank you so much. As I recognize a few people, I can see Juma, I can see Lucy. Thank you, Samuel. As we begin, I want us to rename ourselves. Let us put our countries at the end of our names. For example, mine is James, Team iCow. I would like you also to add the country that you are from at the end of your name. And to do that, you can see at the bottom of your screen, if you're using your phone, touch on participants, and the first name is always your name. Touch on your name and then find where it says rename. On that options, touch at the end of your name, and then you insert the country you are from. Yeah, just touch on participants. You can see Son of Mary, iCow. Please just put your country so that we know the country you are attending from. Thank you. I can see Lucy. You are now clear Njoro, Kenya. Thank you. Now we know. Just touch on your name. Touch on participants, your name, then click rename. At the end of your name, please put the country you are attending this event from. Thank you, Agri from Nairobi. I can see Clayton from Uganda. Welcome. Okay, let's do that once again. Let's follow the instructions. This is the last part. If you get it, I hope you are going to rename yourself successfully. Or at the bottom of the screen, when you touch your phone, if you are using your phone and you are using your laptop, there is a place where it says participants. When you touch that option, participants, the first name is always your name. Touch on your name. Then at the end of your name, and then when you touch your name, it will give you an option to rename. Then click rename, then add your country at the end of your name. Please do so as we start. And I want to take this time now. Yeah, it's 6 minutes past the hour, and I'm now going to invite Su to take us to the in the next phase. And as we begin, let us use the reaction buttons there as we welcome Su to join us. Let us put our hands together for able CEO Su Kahumbu. Thank you, Lucy, for that. Welcome, Su.
Thank you, James, and hi, everyone. This is a moment we have been waiting for a long time, a very long time indeed. And it's so good to be here. It's so good to see so many of you. Before I start, I want to remind you all about iCow and what iCow is and what my team and I aim to do. And the reason we asked you all to put your country names by the side of your names, you'll understand why just now. Our aim and our goal is to optimize smallholder farming practices and systems in Africa through the science-based iCow regenerative agricultural e-extension platform and ecosystems. So we're very clear that we want to reach out and to build technology that can help individuals across Africa. So it's really lovely today to see that we've got Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, South Africa, Somaliland, and from Kenya, all over Kenya in the audience. So welcome. And yeah, so this composting class, the class that are in my April group, you might find that this is going to be like a refresher for you, because a lot of the information you've already seen. You were my guinea pigs, remember? It's good to see you here. Don't run away. You have the answers to all the questions that everyone else is going to ask. So what I'm going to do is I've made 3 videos, and I've combined them together, and I'm going to run those videos one after the other, and I'm going to be stopping at the end for question and answers. So the videos run for about 15 minutes, then we're going to stop for a session of question and answer before we continue. These videos are going to be available on YouTube, so you can watch them over and over and over again, and you can share them, and that's the whole point. As I've said, what we do try to do is to make content that can be shared and can be scaled in a way that it is contextualized to our context in Africa. So thank you, class of April 2024. Big shout out to you, guinea pigs. See you guys. I'm going to go straight now to sharing the video.
Hi, I'm Sue. I'm going to be your instructor during this iCow Compost Masterclass. Strap yourselves in and get ready to have loads of fun. Let's talk about getting ready to make compost and what you need to be wearing to be comfortable. Throughout these videos, you're going to see me in my most comfortable attire. I love to wear very loose, very baggy, very pocketed dungarees because they stay airy. Composting is hot business. I always wear a pair of gumboots, sometimes shorter ones, sometimes longer one, depending on how wet or how rainy it might be outside. And in my many pockets, I carry some of the other essentials. A hat. If it's really hot and sunny, you're going to need a hat. If it's really hot, don't forget some sunscreen. We don't want to be producing good food and getting cancer at the same time. That's why it's important to have all these pockets. Something to drink. There's nothing worse than a hard day's slog in the field doing something and you get thirsty and you don't have something to drink. So make sure you've got a liter or 2 maybe by your side. Composting is hot. It's hot work. Be ready for that. And finally, gloves. I always have gloves. Okay? So throughout these next few videos, you're going to see me in different versions of the same attire. I will always have my gloves. I'll always be in the airiest clothes that I possibly have, the lightest, the loosest, the airiest. Now we're going to move on to the equipment that we need. It's a really good idea to have all of your materials ready before you start making your compost. So I'm going to show you these items one by one. Please do take notes, write them down. You can improvise, but I found this to be extremely easy. To begin with, a good pair of gloves, a little fork, a little spade, some wire, some clippers to clip that wire and to cut the other materials we'll be using, a tape measure for measuring out fabrics that we need, 20-liter bucket, just one will do, a big spade, a pitchfork, very good for turning, a watering can with a good nozzle, and a thermometer. Make sure your thermometer is a composting thermometer that will go up to about 100 degrees centigrade, and that is about 2 feet long. You're also going to need some polymesh. This is chicken polymesh. This will be what will make the cage for the compost outer. A 3.1 meter long piece is good enough to start with, but you'll need to perhaps get one or two of those. Some plastic sheeting to cover the top of your compost to stop the rain getting in. Some shade net. Shade net you'll be using for the bottom of your compost on the little elevated platform that you'll have it on. You'll need two pieces about 1.5 meters by 1.5 meters, and then a piece of about 6 meters long that you will fold in half to wrap around your compost pile to keep the moisture in. Then the big things. Wheelbarrow is always handy. And I use a plastic pallet water-applied compost. It allows air circulation, it doesn't rot. You'll need to have two of those because you've made your compost on one and you're turning it to another. You need to have another one on standby. That's why you also need the two pieces shade net. And finally, I use this very big trough mixing. You can mix by mixing on the ground on a piece of plastic. You'll find that if your pitchfork will start to make holes in the plastic, eventually you'll have to keep it it's not very good. So this big plastic trough is perfect. I drag it around, it's very light to move, drag it around, and put my compost materials in there, mix them up, and chuck them into the cage. I'm now going to show you how to make a compost cage. Remember, we want the compost to breathe. It's an aerobic process. Although thermophilic, it will get very hot. We need the air to come in to breathe through the entire system. If it doesn't, the microbes, as they multiply and generate that heat, they use up the oxygen in the pile. Where there's no oxygen, it can very quickly become anaerobic. So we need the pile to breathe. The materials we're using, the reason we're using the polymesh on the sides, we're using shade net on the bottom of a pallet that allows air to come in and through, hot air rises. The sides of the polymesh allow the compost to breathe in the sides, and then we're going to cover it in shade net just to keep some of the moisture in. And eventually, the only thing that we'll put that is not breathable will be a piece of plastic over the top, held in with a rubber band to stop any rain or any other materials falling on the inside of the compost pile. Biosafety is extremely important when making compost. You're dealing with a lot of bacteria, animal manures, etc., etc. So you want to be safe. This is about the only time that you won't see me in gloves is when I'm making the actual cage. I secure the shape of the cage using wire, different types of wire. You can use just simple electric wire. You can get a pair of snippers to cut the wire. I have it in about 4-inch long pieces that I loop into the polymesh and then twist around to form a little lock. I do reuse the wire over and over and time again, which is why I like it to be a wire that has got some sort of a rubberized coating on it. It's safer on my fingers. I don't like to pierce my fingers on sharp bits of wire, especially working around these environments of high bacteria. I make sure that the wire that I'm using does not leave little cuts in my fingers. And also when you're working around the compost pile, you don't want it to scratch any of your body that is exposed, for example, your arms. I'm going to share with you a Su hack. Once you've made your compost pile and you put your plastic on top, it can blow away. It can get rained on, and the rain sits in and it creates a pool in the middle that either collapses the entire pile or tips your pile over on the side or whatever. So what I've made here is a big band that goes down. I've used a piece of string that has just come off, recycled piece of string. We love purpose. Piece of string that has come off a hay bale, and a piece of rubber, vehicle tire or anything else. So that acts now as a big band that can eventually go around the compost and hold that plastic down. You'll thank me later. Here's another hack. Get all of your materials ready beforehand, right? So with your wire, get your wire measured out. I basically take the wire, move it around, get the measurements that I want. Get all these bits ready so that by the time I'm ready to wire up the cage, I have my pieces ready. So I clean it like that. And then I'll go through here very quickly. Here very quickly. And I have now got a bunch of pieces of bits of wire. So you might be tempted to use tie wraps. Okay, tie wraps are cool, they're easy to use, they're cheap to buy, but they're not reusable. So remember, we're talking about reusing and repurposing materials that you've got. So if you've got to buy anything new, make sure that it's something that you can reuse over and over and over. If you end up with a lot of plastic tie wraps, not a good idea. We all know how we feel about plastics. So I'm going to go ahead and build it and take notes, roll out the mesh to get exactly 12 feet. It's a little bit longer than we need, but it helps to give the structure some integrity. And the easiest way to do it is to roll it out. Really easy and nice and easy to cut this poly mesh. Much nicer on the hand than wire. There we go. Now we have our poly mesh. There'll be about 3 feet overlap. So you're getting a piece of net which is about 1 meter diameter by the time you start tying it together. And try to make sure that when you're securing the poly mesh, it is an exact fit. You don't end up with the piece being bigger at the bottom than it is at the top. The best way to do that is to secure one piece, then follow the line and secure the bottom of that side. And then you'll know that it's going to be flush all the way around when you secure this. Actually, big, don't worry. Actually, now we just lie it down because we're following these lines. What I'm trying to do here is to line just raise exactly flush. There we are, perfect. Flushed all the way down to the bottom. The ties on the mesh are on the outside of the cage because you want to access them all the time. So these ties are on the outside. Okay, and now we're going to secure this other bit here. So you can see that part of the cage is double lined. That just helps to give it a lot more structure. Integrity, sorry. If your mesh is too short, you might find that it's difficult to stand and withstand the weight of the actual compost. And we're putting a lot of materials in here, about 1 ton. Thank you, Lynette. So here we are. What do we have now? A loop, a really cool loop of net mesh that just about reaches the width of the pallet, and the pallet is 1 meter wide. You don't want it to go over the edge or drop materials out, and you don't want it to be too small. So this is about 1 meter. And let's have the measurement. This should be about 1 meter. Yep, exactly. Well, it's 3 feet and a little bit. Good enough. So now we put the shade net on the floor to stop materials going down. Okay. Sometimes, and if your pallet is small, let the shade net go down or let it be a little bit longer so that when you're moving materials across into, when you're turning your compost, you can pull out that shade net to catch any bits that fall down. So you can have longer bits that you might fold into the edge until you start turning it. Next step, very important, when you're putting your cage onto the net, make sure that it doesn't move the net and end up falling. The next step that I'm going to show you is something you're not going to do at this point when you make your compost, but I feel like it's important to show you so that you understand. There's going to be wrapping the shade net around the cage, which you'll only do once your compost is in there. There's a chance that while I do this, the cage collapses because it just does not have structural integrity, perhaps to hold the shade net, plastic on top, and a rubber loop around it. But I'm going to try and demonstrate it to you anyway, so that you get the gist of what you need the materials for. Let's go. So here's the shade net. We take it around the edge, all the way around the plane. Make sure that it comes all the way down to the bottom. Cage. The width of the shade net is slightly longer than the cage, doesn't matter unless it will hang into the top. Now, and then what we're going to do is just fold it back a little bit. There you go. That's normally what will happen only once the compost is in. Okay. Plastic to the top to stop anything entering your compost. You could be under trees like I am here. You don't want new green material coming in at any point in time once you've made the compost. That's it. The plastic cover also to stop rain. And then we've got this thing here, which is going to be fun to see if we can actually hold this up. It might just collapse. Bit of fun, hey? Yes. Go stand back. Whoa. There you go. So no matter what, no matter how much wind there is, no matter how much drama there is, the compost will always be protected and it will always breathe from the side. When you do have rain, what we do is we stick a stick in the middle of the compost, and that gives the entire tented shape so that the water will still run off. I'm sure you're already excited now, because now you know how to make the cage, you know how to make the structure, you know what the materials, the tools, etc. are for, and you're excited and gunning to go on making compost now. So let's do it.
Okay, so that was the first part, and that's actually on YouTube as the introduction to the Compost Masterclass. Do we have any questions? We can do maybe 3 questions now from the audience. Put your hands up. James will give you the microphone. If you have any questions about this specific part of what we've just learned, if there are any parts that you didn't understand that you want more information on. We'll take 3 questions. If we don't have questions, we'll just continue. But Derek, go ahead. I see your hand is up. James, you can give Derek the microphone.
Okay, Derek, unmute.
Hi everyone. Thank you for the presentation. And I have a similar wire mesh in the store, and I was wondering what do I do with that. Thank you for the idea. When it comes to turning it, how would you go about that? Because I've been experiencing high temperatures with most of my composts. I come from a relatively cold area, so external heat is not quite a challenge, but rather cold is the challenge. Okay,
you're jumping ahead of the game here. We will talk about turning it. So you'll see that in the next video or so. All the information is there. But if you are in an area where where your temperatures are cold, when we talk about the recipe that we're making, you might find that you'll want to add a little bit more of what we're calling the party food, the material that will create the heat in the compost pile if your outside temperatures are very cold. You'll hear all about that within the next few minutes. Ibrahim, over to you.
Ibrahim, unmute. Accept the prompt on your screen. Okay, there's a question there, Sue. Someone is asking, what if I don't have any of the resources she's showcasing there? Any suggestion?
So you can make a compost pile without a cage. Keep in mind that you want your material to stack up. Keep in mind you want to have air underneath, so you can put materials like wooden poles or something across the bottom with a bit of something just to stop the materials going in. We have in our previous class, the video that I did in 2006 was the lasagna method of making compost. The reason we've done this compost making masterclass is because we really do need to upgrade. So if you don't have materials, try to improvise with whatever it is that you can find, but keep the principles in mind. You must get aeration through the pile all the time. You must reach certain temperatures, and your materials must all get churned into the process. So try and think about the principles that you're learning, improvise with what you've got, and then work your way towards getting the equipment, because it really is an investment in the right direction. When you've got the right equipment, you've got the right compost. Honestly, if you were ever buying fertilizers or any of those other inputs, spending money on those things, you're going to find now that what you're learning takes away the necessity of all of those. So please think of it also as an investment. What are your next farm investments going to be? Composting should be the first thing you invest in. Okay, so I'm going to jump into sharing again and continuing now with the next part, and then we will stop as well. So post some of your questions into the WhatsApp group, into the chat, into our chat here, and we can then answer them quite quickly. My question is, how do you water, and is there alternative for making the similar compost like making a wooden structure? You don't want anything that is completely solid that stops air getting in, okay? And don't worry about water, you're going to learn about how you wet your compost now.
So what exactly is thermophilic compost? Our thermophilic compost method entails deliberately decomposing dead organic matter in the presence of oxygen, so aerobe conditions, and reaching hot temperature thresholds of over 55 degrees centigrade. Good quality thermophilic composting results in the high presence of diverse soil microbes and metabolites that we regenerative farmers use to inoculate and regenerate our soils and revitalize our crops. You can use your compost in different ways, as a solid compost, as an extract, or as a tea. Remember, it is an inoculation of soil microbes, so your fungi, your protozoa, your nematodes, your bacteria. If you don't have good levels, if you don't have good balance in your compost, your original compost, you won't get the good balance in your teas or your extracts. So it's fundamentally important to get your compost, solid compost, made extremely well and with very good and balanced microbial diversity. Composting is like cooking. You're going to need a good working environment, a good recipe, quality ingredients, great execution of that recipe, the right temperatures and moisture, of course, mixing when required, and then, of course, settling before consumption. So you're going to want to make your compost in a cool place that is protected from wind, from rain, from too much sun, You want your compost piles to be made close to where there's water and also close to where you're going to be using them so that you don't have to be trudging your ready-made compost over long distances. So we're making our compost to grow microbes, in particular our bacteria, our fungi, our protozoa, and our nematodes. When we look at why we're doing it, it could be because of our next desired crop based on the succession and the fungal to bacterial ratio, but it could be also because our plants are suffering from pests and diseases, which indicate that our soils are missing a good solid soil food web balance. And speaking of balances, in order to get the bacteria, the fungi, the nematodes, and the protozoa into our compost, we need to make sure that we're giving them the right food. It's their party right. So we start off with the party food, which is to encourage the bacterial activity. The bacteria come in and chomp on that very high nitrogen bacterial food, and in the process multiply and drive up temperatures very steeply. In the process also, they begin to consume a lot of oxygen, and that's why when we reach some of those temperatures, we need to turn the pile to bring oxygen back in, but also to change the sides and the other materials and bring them into the mix. It's the core of the compost that will actually have that be like the furnace of the compost. The green materials are burned slower, so they keep the temperatures right up in the thermophilic phase that we want. We want 3 turns at above 55 degrees, and we'll talk about those thresholds later. Minimum of 3 turns throughout the duration of making the compost. And as the compost cools down, the other microorganisms will come in to predate on the bacteria, and we'll see the amoeba, the nematodes, and also the fungi, etc., levels growing. So the thermophilic stage is really just to make sure that we kill all pathogens in all the materials and in all the, the sides, the top, the bottom of the pile, and that we kill any seeds that might be in there as well. Our recipe will be 10% party food, 30% greens, and 60% high carbon or browns. For the party food, it's really important that it's high in nitrogen. So we're looking at things like, if you look at, for example, a maize cob and cow manure, your cow manure has much more nitrogen in it than a maize cob. So when we look at the list of our party foods, manures are high in those lists, and all of the manures have different relative amounts of nitrogen. It's advisable to work with the manures that are closest to you. It's going to be much more cost effective, and also you're going to have biology that is native to your area. You can see that horse manure has less nitrogen than, say, chicken manure. And you also find that you might have some high nitrogen ingredients around you that are not on the list. For example, I use black soldier fly frass, which has got a very high carbon to nitrogen ratio. What I advise you to do is have a look on the internet, and you'll be able to look at those carbon to nitrogen ratios. And typically you're trying to look at things that have a carbon to nitrogen ratio of less than 10, less than 15, maybe 15 to 1, 10 to 1, something like that will give you some good party food. For your greens, you're looking for a carbon to nitrogen ratio of on average around 30 to 1. It could be higher, right up to even 500 to 1. But what you're looking for essentially are materials that have got greens in them. You can also use in your greens compost that has failed, so spent compost piles, and a bunch of other things, including your kitchen waste from your kitchen, your green waste from your kitchen. But typically your greens can be your weeds, your green grasses, your garden waste, your vegetable waste, fresh stover, maize stover. As long as it's looking green, is lush and a little bit green, you can count those, consider those as your greens. So green grass that has dried as green, but has now gone a strawy-ish color with tinges of green in it, is still considered green. The nitrogen was still in it. It was still a more of a green input than if it had dried, for example, like straw dried in the field and gone through senescence. So think about that when you're thinking about your grasses. When you harvest them, you don't want to put them in a big pile because they heat up just so very quickly, but you can lay them out or let your grasses dry as green and still store them then dried and use them as green. Your browns generally are very high in carbon. So those are either plants that have dried. So maize stover that may have dried would be considered a brown. Wood chips, twigs, cardboard, paper, straw, all of those materials that have gone through their growth period or are just very high in lignin and in carbon. There are a few considerations you want to take about the ingredients that you're using. So let's look at party food first. What is the carbon to nitrogen ratio of the party food that you're thinking of using? If you don't know, have a good look on the internet. There's plenty of information there. What was the animal's diet? An animal that is fed on grain will have a higher carbon to nitrogen ratio, more nitrogen in the end product than an animal that is not fed on grains. It will be more party foodish. How fresh is manure? Old manure is less party food than fresh manure. Your bacteria won't have such a big party in old manure. What's the likelihood of dewormers? So dewormers will affect the nematodes, and you want nematodes to grow. They're part of the soil food web. What is the likelihood of antibiotics? That will also affect the organisms, because antibiotics actually are there to kill bacteria and to kill microbes. What is the likelihood of any other contaminants, sprays, etc.? And then finally, considering the denseness of the weight of your party food. An example is something like horse manure versus black soldier fly frass. A bucket of horse manure and a bucket of black soldier fly frass, it might both be in terms of volume the same. The black soldier fly frass will be much denser, much heavier. And when I use it sparingly. So I use 5% of black soldier fly frass and then increase the carbon by an extra 5%. So you don't want your compost pile to fire up and keep burning away over a long period of time, because you'll have to keep breaking it down to stop it becoming anaerobic, running out of oxygen, and it'll be a lot of labor and a lot of work. So let's look at our considerations for greens. We want to know how old is the green material, how long has it stayed, how long since it was harvested. A very young, say, clippings of a lawn versus long grass that has already seeded versus grass that has still got the seed in the stalk. Each of those will have different reactions in your compost pile, so you can practice with the different materials you have and see how they contribute to the long burn. It'll be based on those differentials. Could there be contaminants in the materials, pesticides, etc.? How quickly will they heat up if they're left in a pile? So sometimes you can use that as an indicator. If you want to know if your grass is going to be good in keeping that slow burn, put it in a pile and see what kind of energy it has in it in terms of its heating capacity. Sometimes you can put your grass in a pile and within a few hours, the temperatures are really high. I have mine going up to 65 degrees just within a day. Are they cut up enough, or will they take a long time to break down? Yeah, so make sure that your materials are cut down so that the microbes can get at them easier. At the same time, you don't want the grass to be clumping up. And that's why I say when you're mixing your grass in your pile, mix it in as a dry material so you can fluff it around and it isn't all clumping together. When you get your grasses and things or leaves clumping together, they can very quickly turn a pile or create anaerobic pockets in a pile because the oxygen can't get through. The microbes that will survive in those conditions will be the anaerobes, and we don't really want them. So finally, looking at the brown materials and the conditions we need to look out for. How dry are they? How much soaking is needed? Remember, your compost pile is going to take a few months to break down. If you don't have your materials saturated enough with enough water in them, the 50% which we'll talk about, then they will dry in the middle and the microbes won't grow. So how dry are your browns to begin with? Because that will influence how much soaking is needing. Could there be contaminants in the materials, pesticides, etc.? Are you using wood that has been treated? Not good. Are they the right size to encourage porosity? So your browns actually bring in two aspects, not only fungal food, but also aeration, because you don't want to have finely ground sawdust or wood shavings. You want to have wood chips so that as they're moved around, as they're turned around, they also create a fluffier and more breathable if that's the right word to use, compost. And then you want to know that they're not too dense also, I just said that they could cause anything like
Sorry for that technical hitch, and it is going to be fixed in a moment. Sorry for that technical hitch, and it is going to be in a moment. Sue is going to join us in a short while, but I can see Derek's hand is up. Derek, would you like to unmute so that you can start some chat? We can talk. Please unmute.
Yeah. Sorry. Thank you, James. From what Sue has just presented, and there's a video I had shared in the group in our cohort. I just realized I might have had the wrong ratios. I had manure quite high, so the thermophilic activity was quite high, I suppose. Or am I wrong? Because I had, I think it was 25% of organic. There was high organic kitchen waste, and then there was manure, which was a lot, and then there was a balance of the green and the brown matter. So after a week, the solution, a week and a few days actually, the compost pile was quite thermophilic. When we checked it, it had high temperatures. Probably that was the wrong ratios I had.
Hello. Sorry, everyone. The drummers. So can you all hear me? I can't see. I don't have a microphone yet. I don't have camera yet. But I hope that you can hear me. Derek, thank you for that. Lucy, thank you for that. I'm so sorry. I mean, oh man, I've tried to switch between Safaricom, Airtel, Jamil. Anyway, we're back. I need the camera. Hello, everyone. Have you had fun? Derek, I heard you asking a question there. I caught the tail end of it. Do you want to just repeat that, and then I can help you quickly? Go ahead. Please give Derek the microphone.
Yeah, thank you for that. I was just saying, from the ratios you presented, then I shared a video in the group cohort, and I think the ratios I had for the manure were quite high.
Yes.
Because, yes, so that's why the thermophilic activity was quite high in quite a short time. It was a week, few days, yeah.
Exactly. You had 2 wheelbarrows of goat manure, wasn't it? And then you had two wheelbarrows of manure, and you had one wheelbarrow of greens, and everything just like fired up, and it was really steaming.
Yeah, it was rabbit manure. Yeah.
Rabbit manure, that's right. Rabbit, and rabbit's even more common. But you know what? Take those as learnings. Now you know how that material works. And that's why we're doing this course, right? So that we understand our materials. And we will have lots of piles that do all kinds of different things. But the idea is that we then get to learn what our material, our localized material is doing and what it can do for us.
Thank you.
So,
thank you.
Pleasure and good try. And I know you're going to do better next time. So, and I'm glad you're here. So let me continue.
I need the recipe stage. We're going to do a 47 by 20 litre recipe. That'll give us about 940 cubic litres. The 10% will be 4.7 buckets of party food, 14.1 buckets of green, and 28.2 buckets of browns. Get your materials weighed out, get them ready, put them on the side before you go on to the next steps. The day before you make your compost, make sure that you make your cage so that you're not faffing and trying to get that done all at the same time. It's a lot of work, as I've said before. If you don't know how to make the cage, just go back to our lesson before this, the introductory to this composting masterclass. The evening before you make your compost, soak all your brown materials. So take all your wood chips, all your cardboard, or whatever the materials are that you're using with brown, and soak them. I put mine into a bath of water, completely drown them. I do the same thing with my straw. I put the straw into water, step on it, mush it down, and leave it overnight from 6 p.m. Until early morning, 8, 9 o'clock in the morning. I chuck away the water from the straw, by the way, because I don't know where it was produced, and it could have inherent pesticides that I don't want to be in my pile. So I also use this as a method of rinsing out any potential pesticides in the straw. On the day of making your compost, you've got 3 things to do. Try and do them in this order. Get all your dry materials out of the water and let them drain. So just put them on the grass on the side, or I put them on a plastic sheet and let them drain. I then start getting my greens ready, either raking those up that I've cut and had naturally dried out in the field rather than in piles, or I start mowing the grass, or chopping up if I'm using maize stalks or anything, chopping them up then into smaller bits and pieces. And then take your party food and also water in it and bring it up to about a 50% wet, sort of like slurry. Now divide all of the materials into 4. You're going to be mixing in batches of 4. This will be less labor intensive than trying to mix the whole lot in one go, but it will also help you to get more uniformity across the entire compost pile. You're going to have 1.2 buckets of party food, 3.5 buckets of greens, and 7 buckets of browns for each of your batches. Put them all into your trough or all into the area that you're going to mix them. So now is a real critical time. You need to bring your batch 1 up to a moisture level of about 50%. So to measure that 50%, you'll be adding in water incrementally, slowly as you mix and turn and get all of those ingredients mixed into a lovely homogeneous mix. We'll take a handful of the compost out and squeeze it. At 50%, you'll see a few drops appear just between your fingertips. If they drop and you get a lot of drops falling from your hand, that is well above 50%. And if there's no liquid at all that seeps through your fingers there into that 1 drop, your compost is a little bit too dry. Keep adding water incrementally until you get it as close to that 50% as you possibly can. Take your first batch and fill it into the cage that you've got ready, and continue the process with the next 3 batches until you've filled it up to the top. Composting is really hard work, so get some help to make sure that you keep that consistency throughout the whole process. Once your compost cage is full to the top, wrap the cage with some shade net to keep the moisture in, keep the wind out. Put a thermometer in and take your first reading, and put a peg with an ID in it, so that in case you're making more than 1 compost, you don't mistake which is which. Then take some plastic or some tarpaulin, put it across the top to stop anything getting into the compost pile, anything falling from above, or any rain. At this point as well, you'll also want to put a band around to hold the plastic down so that it doesn't get blown off. And you might want to put, you'll pull up your thermometer. It will act as tempt the plastic a little bit so that if it does rain, the rain will just run off. And that's it. Next up, record keeping.
Okay. So another little break for us to see if we've got any questions there. And let's have a look into the questions. If you have anything that you'd like to ask, please do put your hand up. I'm going to quickly go into the chat and see what questions we had in the chat. Okay. I don't know why I'm not seeing. Oh, you know what happened in that gap? I lost all I lost all the questions. I can't see any. So if there are any questions, please do ask them again. I did see one that was, can you use donkey manure? Yes, you can. Treat your donkey manure like your horse manure. It'll probably be a little bit, it depends. Your donkeys are normally not being fed the same ingredients that horses are. If you're getting your horse manure from horse breeders or somebody who's looking after horses, training them or riding them a lot, they might be feeding them more grain. Donkeys typically don't get as good food as horses do. So their party food might be a little bit less partyful. Stella, you've asked, where do you get the long thermostat, the thermometer? So you can buy them from Jumia in Kenya. I got mine originally from Amazon, but now I can see that you can actually get them from Jumia. They're about 3,100 shillings on Jumia, and they can deliver them to you. Do you press the materials as you're filling up the net or just fill it without compacting? So you don't want to be compacting it really. The only time you might use your pitchfork inside the pile is if you've, and that's why it's really important. Those 47 buckets will fill exactly a 1 meter by 1 meter, width and height tower. If you've made 70 buckets because you've got lots of material, you're going to have too much material for that particular frame. So you're going to have to either make 2 frames or you're going to have stuff left over. If you've got 1 or 2 buckets left over, you can just use a pitchfork and jiggle the material down a little bit to fit it all in. But you're right, we don't want to be having a massive compact. We don't want to be pressing it down. Remember, it's about aeration. We want the compost pile to breathe. Okay? Emma, you've asked about adding forest soil. You don't need to add forest soil. All of the materials that you're putting in there come in with their own biology on them. So don't worry about adding forest soil. In addition, your forest soil might be coming from an environment that is cool. And remember, you are now taking your compost through a thermophilic stage. So you're likely to have whatever biology you bring in. Your forest soil might bring in some lovely earthworms. They're going to get cooked. Okay, some of the biology. So the biology in cool materials doesn't really like to be in hot materials. And we're trying to create thermophilic phases here. Banana stems and banana leaves, yes, you can add them. Chop them up, put them in, you can add them as your greens. And yes, they do have a lot of water in them. So you might find as you're doing your test, try and chop them up quite small. Yeah, you don't want to have huge, big pieces. Banana leaves that are dry go in as a very good brown. The one thing with banana leaves that you'll find is they break down very slowly, sometimes the brown ones, because they've got a waxy coating on them. And you might find that your temperatures take a little bit longer if you have a lot of banana material in them, because the biology can't get through that wax. You know, when you pour water on a banana leaf, it just goes off like an umbrella. And the biology have got to wait for it really to break down. And as long as there's lots of surface area, so it's really chopped up small, they can get at it faster. But if you put big pieces in there, chances are your compost will take a while to heat up because that stuff won't break down. And we've seen with things like water hyacinth, where the heating actually began to happen way, way, way into the process, many, many days. Like I think it was 21 days, we saw heating happening with water hyacinth. It has the same kind of like waxy covering that banana leaves do. Banana leaves, also be careful. If they're lying flat and you've got lots of them in there, the air can't get in between. They create wet anaerobic pockets and the anaerobes get in there, and you don't want that. So make sure you're fluffing it all up together with everything else. Can you use urea as a source of nitrogen? No. Don't be putting urea into your compost. Forget about urea. You don't need it. You don't need urea at all, okay? Would you add forest soil? We've discussed that. To your fungal piles. You know, I wouldn't and I don't, and your fungal food is what will bring you in. So for example, I've got very high fungi in some of my compost, but it's because of the materials that I use. I didn't bring any soil in. You're trying to create soil, guys. You're trying to feed the soil. Don't put it into your compost if you don't have to, right? Are there some green materials that give better composts? There are. I find that fresh green grass is really good. It's better than stuff that is grown. Remember, you're talking about the energy. So when a plant starts to grow, it'll have a lot of nitrogen in the first growth stuff. Then eventually it will start to grow up and produce some, seeds, and eventually it will dry up and die. When you're doing your greens, although they might look green, you want to get them in that phase where they're highest in nitrogen. Those will give you the best temperatures. Okay. Question there, how do you measure the PF greens and browns, by weight or volume? We're doing it by volume in buckets. Don't stack the buckets too dense, but we're doing it in buckets. That works fine. For me, that works better than doing it by weight, and you don't need scales. What about adding blacks and grays to the compost pile, crushed charcoal, black, char dust, etc.? You can add those if you want. You can, and there is no harm in adding char dust, some of those things, but I wouldn't be adding them in as a primary. Your primary ingredients are your party food, your greens, and your browns. If you want to add any of those in as additives, you can, but don't put them in as the volumes of those 3 primary ingredients, because you need those things. Remember, you're trying to make your temperatures, you're trying to get your compost through the thermophilic temperature. If you're going to add in a whole bunch of char dust, the likelihood is, and you replace some of your greens with char dust, it's not going to happen. So only add in, if you're going to add in your char dust, add them in with your carbons, and not wholesomely. Make sure that you've got good porosity and bigger pieces of wood chips and things, I think. How long will the wood chips take to decompose? It depends on the wood chips. So depends on how old they are, how porous they are, how wet they were when you soaked them, how much biology is in your pile, what temperatures you reach. Typically, they're the last things to break down. So you find that sometimes a lot of your compost is ready. It looks like lovely soil almost, and you still see some wood chips in it. And you'll see some pictures in the next video, and that's fine too. They break down the last. I want to try to dry azolla into the compost. To add dry, does this fall in the brown or green, since azolla is a firm nitrogen fixing plant? I use salvinia. You saw the salvinia floating in my pond, and azolla is exactly the same kind of thing. And it worked really, really well. It brought other things into the pile as well. It brought silicates because as it was growing in water, there were a lot of diatoms that were forming along the base and and under the roots. And that brought a lot of silicates, which bring more nutrients actually back into your end compost. So I don't know if I would dry it. Try using it green. If you're going to use it dry, it might go in as your browns. If you're going to use it undry, it can go in as your greens, and you don't need to soak it. Is there any IMO you can use to accelerate the composting process? Some people do add some IMOs, so those are indigenous microorganisms. Some people do add them in at some points, and that comes back to the issue around your forest microbes. I have never needed to do that, okay? So, and I've never needed to add EM. If you're working with and the other thing about things like EM and other organisms that you might be bringing into your compost, if they're not native to your area, the chances are that they probably aren't going to survive. They're probably going to die. So let's try and work with the material that you have available to you, and that is most cost effective for you to begin with, and get the processes right before you start switching in and out with different ingredients, okay? Okay, I think we've done most of the questions there. Can I now go on? There's one there also from our experiments with the boys on inoculating compost with bioactive microorganisms versus making the environment conducive to existing organisms, hence no need to purchase BA. Exactly. You're making the organisms. You don't need to purchase them. Okay. So there's 2 more messages there. I'll look at those quickly. What is your fantasy pile in regards to highest quality biology and finished results? You'll see as we move on some of the things that I've done that have worked. Is it okay to add yeast? You don't have to add yeast or kombucha or anything like that to the pile. Absolutely not. That's just an added expense. Doesn't make sense. You're going to work with materials that are really cost effective, right? If you have got old kombucha baby scobies, chuck them in there. They can go in there with some of your party food. but don't be going out of your way to do that. That's just creating another level of complexity and expense, and it's absolutely not necessary. Most organic farmers want certification for their farming practices. How can compost be certified as a source of nutrition for their plants? So if you're going to, the organic regulations are that if you're going to make an organic product, it needs to be made by organic ingredients. So that means that you're planting, all the materials that you've gathered need to be organic. And it's a big issue trying to do that if you want to sell organic compost. So we can have a different discussion about certification at another date. But for all our intents and purposes now, as long as you're making, and we want to get to a point, guys, actually, where the word organic without the certification, that's what you're doing on your farms. You're producing your compost, you're using your compost with materials from your farm that are increasing your soil productivity and increasing your plant health. And therefore, you don't need to use any of those other inputs that come across as being inorganic inputs, like conventional things, synthetic fertilizers, etc. When your plants are healthy, they won't get pests, so you're not going to need those pesticides either. So that's what we're trying to do, fix the soils, and then organic is going to become a word that is out there with or without the paper, with or without certification. It will be the mode that you're doing, which is clean food at the end of the day, clean production and cost effective. So I'm going to go now into the next part of the video, if that's okay. So we go into now turning, because you're all wondering, well, how do you turn? So let's go into the next part here.
When turning our compost piles, we're going to follow 3 simple rules. The core goes to the bottom, the top and the sides go to the core, and the bottom goes to the top. Over the course of 14 to 21 days, we'll be turning our compost pile a minimum of 3 times. If we have our recipe correct, we're likely to be doing the first turn between 3 to 6 days. That's when the temperatures should have reached the 55 degrees centigrade threshold and been able to maintain 55 degrees or above for a maximum of 3 days. When turning your pile, you'll notice that the actual material volume has decreased and therefore decreased the size of the cage slightly so that you still keep a 1-to-1 ratio of width to height of the compost in the cage when you make it for the second time. The process of turning your pile each time is exactly the same. Remember, we said core to bottom, bottom to top, top and sides, core. 2 key parameters you need to keep an eye on are temperature and moisture. We use temperatures to kill off seeds and pathogens, and we aim for a minimum temperature of 55 degrees centigrade. However, temperatures can range from between 55 to 77. Moisture should be at around 50%, and you can tell that by doing the hand squeeze test. The 1 drop of water that comes through your fingers when you squeeze your compost indicates 50%. Anything less is below 50%, anything more is above 50%. Try to make sure that your compost is at 50% moisture at all times. Your first thermophilic cycle will be influenced by the quality and quantity of the party food in your pile. Within 3 to 6 days, you should actually be up in about the 60-65 range. Note down the temperature of your pile every morning and every early evening. Your compost pile will increase in temperature as the bacteria multiply and decompose the materials. We calculate our turning times based on the temperature in the core. Thus, make sure your thermometer is measuring the center of the core. Let's assume that you made your pile on Monday in the morning, and 3 days later in the morning, the pile had reached between 55 to 57 degrees centigrade. You'd start counting 72 hours, 3 days, from this day, and you'd be expecting to turn your pile then on Thursday morning. If, however, the temperature rose to 74 degrees by Tuesday morning, you start counting 12 hours from this time, and then you do your first turn. Each compost pile will behave differently. Always follow the highest threshold the pile meets at each thermophilic cycle. Your aim is to reach 3 thermophilic cycles, thus 3 turns, before your compost can be left to rest and become mature. By having reached those 3 cycles, we know that you will have pasteurized or you will have killed any seeds in the pile and killed all of the pathogens. If your pile doesn't reach these thresholds, don't worry. Learn from the materials, learn from your mistakes, think about what may have compromised the temperatures. Was it the party food? Was it the green materials? Was it the quality of each or the quantity of each? And make slight adjustments on the next pile. We're keeping records so that we can repeat the process, we can repeat the composts that are good, and we can avoid the composts that are bad or learn from those that didn't make it. The records we're going to want to keep are about the recipe, what were our materials, what were the volumes of the materials that we used. We want to keep our daily temperatures, the ambient temperature, which can impact on what a compost will do, how quickly or how slowly it will heat up, the morning temperatures, the evening temperatures. And then we also want to keep records on the moisture levels of the piles at all time to make sure that we are maintaining that 50% moisture. Let's look at a few issues of troubleshooting. So first one, what if your temperatures aren't reached for the first heating cycle? It could be that there wasn't enough moisture. The microbes need moisture. Maybe you haven't reached that 50% mark. You need to go back to your recipe and see if you soaked your ingredients appropriately. Maybe there was too much moisture and it became compact and became anaerobic and the pile couldn't breathe. So you'll check on that. It could have had too little nitrogen. So next time you'll add a little bit more, so a little bit more party food. Or you could have had poor porosity, which would also imply you're going to get some sort of compaction and then the pile may not heat up adequately. If your pile doesn't heat up first cycle, look through this list to try and correct it. Make the pile again. Don't expect the pile to heat up. If it hasn't heated up the first time, it's not going to. So make the pile again, and you can use these materials as green and browns, and then adjust as we discussed, adjust the nitrogen, and sometimes maybe you can adjust some of the green materials as well. But especially your party food, which is that gets your temperature right up. It could also be that your compost pile is too small, it's in a very windy area. So try to stick to the 47 bucket pile that we're talking about, which gives you just a good enough volume to get the right temperatures. Anything smaller, you might have a wide surface area that, and if you're in very cool temperatures, it might not heat up because it simply can't. What if you made the first temperature, but you didn't make the second temperature? And remember that we're trying to rebound to the 55-degree threshold within 24 hours of our turn. So we're trying to turn it quickly. We're trying to rebound to those temperatures as quickly as possible. But what if it doesn't happen the second time? Again, now your second threshold, your second thermophilic stage, and your third, are more dependent on your green materials, the quality and volumes of those. So it could be that a couple of things. First, we'll look again at moisture, not enough moisture. Make sure you've got that right. Too much. We've said that before. And then poor quality greens. So go back to your recipe, have a look at those. What to do if it doesn't heat up a second time. Make the pile all over again. And now you can start using these materials as your brown materials, but get better quality greens and better volumes of green for your next pile. By now, you'd be thinking that a 10, 30, 60 might not work for you. The materials that you have, you might need to increase the volumes of your party food as well as your greens. Do the reductions in the browns, that's not a problem, but to get those temperatures through those thresholds, it will be your party food and your greens. Oh boy, I really hope this doesn't happen, but what if you've gone through your first cycle, you've gone through your second cycle, it's happened to me, and you get to your third one and it just doesn't make it. Oh man, it is extremely frustrating. Again, it could be because there's not enough moisture, it could be because there's too much moisture, but chances are it's because you have poor quality greens more than anything else, not enough quality and volume of those greens. So what should you do? Make the pile again, Remember, you've not reached the stage where you're going to have gotten rid of all the pathogens and all of the seeds. And if you do use this pile the way it is, the chances are you will still bring those back in your fields. So if you want to make a good biocomplete compost as per the learnings that are in this masterclass, then redo the pile. It's frustrating, redo it. You'll finally get it. The process that you've gone through will really help you to understand the materials that you're working with. And it's far better to go through that process than to have got a lucky strike and got your compost right. And then for the next few times, it might not happen as well, and you won't know where your problems are. The other thing is smells. If your compost smells or it begins to smell, it means it's going anaerobic. It means that it's probably too wet. You're going to have to restart your pile again and adjust your materials so that you don't encounter the same problem next time. I recommend that you get a notebook and you dedicate it, especially for your compost piles. And on one page, you put down all the materials and the records that you can see in this small template here. And the following pages you dedicate to a template of doing your temperature and moisture records, as we'll show in the next example. This is an example of a pile that we started on the 1st of January. You can see that by day 3, the temperature thresholds had reached 55 degrees and required turning 72 hours from that time. And it was turned on day 6 in the morning. The records show the turn took exactly an hour, and by the next morning at 8:30, it was back up over that 55 threshold at 62 degrees, and therefore ready to wait another 72 hours. It was turned again in the morning of the 10th. The records also show that the temperature dropped to 31 degrees after that 1 hour turn on the 10th, but by the 11th in the morning at 8:30, it bounced back up to within the threshold of 55 again, and it managed to maintain that up until the 14th for the final 3rd turn. You can also see that the temperatures never went up above the 55 degree threshold again and slowly came down. However, if they had lingered in the 40 to 50 sort of threshold, that's still an active threshold of compost, you would either be expected to punch some holes in it with something like a broom handle and let the heat dissipate through chimneys, or do another turn after another 2 to 3 days, just so that the pile doesn't go anaerobic, and then leave the pile to slowly come to maturity. You're probably wondering how long it will take before your compost is ready to use. On the light side, it will be ready to use in a minimum of about 3 months. That's what I've seen here in Kenya. It could take a lot longer if you're in a much colder area or you're making compost during the cold season, because the biological activity will slow down due to temperatures. Leaving it longer does result in more biological microbial diversity, which is also a great thing to do if you have time. Or just make 2 piles, have one that you might want to use with less diversity because you need it immediately, and another that you can use with more diversity, but you've left over a longer period of time. Signs that your compost are ready. You can't see or recognize the starting materials in the pile. You might have a few wood chips that are still breaking down, but nothing much else. Your compost smells like earth. It's attracting earthworms. And once your pile has reached ambient temperature, you can actually toy with adding earthworms to it. And that can be fun as well. They'll be happy to stay in there and add to the microbial diversity and give you some really great biocomplete compost to work with for your extracts or your teas. Using compost that is still active can actually damage your seeds and your plants. So it's a really good idea that you check and test that your compost is ready before you use it. The press test is a very simple test to do. You take some pressed seeds, or you can take other microgreens like kale or cabbages or radishes. Radishes are good to use. Bring a small amount of compost, up to 50% moisture, in a jar and with a lid. Only about 1/3 of the jar full. Put the compost in, sprinkle some seeds in and put the lid on it and leave it to see if it germinates. If it germinates and the little plants, the seedlings grow, your compost is ready. If it germinates and they die, it means that there are noxious gases that are still coming off your compost that will damage any seeds or any plants that you put your compost, or any roots that you put your compost on. So very good test to do. Use radish or kale seeds to do it. It's really important to store your compost well, store it in a well-ventilated area. You can let the moisture levels go down to 35 to 45. Check off and then add a little bit of water. You don't want it to dry out. Before you use it, dampen it back up to 50% moisture for a few days, maybe before you use it, just to wake up all the dormant microbes. You can use this wonderful compost now to make great extracts and teas. So here's an example of 3 of my piles. One was made in March. It's 17 weeks old now, and the other 2 were made with 2-day difference between them in June. So they are about 7 weeks old now. So although I had enough materials to do 3 piles straight away, I decided to do 1. And to see how the ingredients in it worked, I put in only 1 party feed, which is black soldier fly. And then I put in fresh grass clippings on Salvinia pondweed, and then wood chips and straws for the browns. Now, the temperatures were quite warm at that time. The daily temperatures were between 17 and 27 degrees. The black soldier fly frass had a carbon to nitrogen ratio of about 5:1, so it was quite strong. So I reduced the amount of my black soldier fly frass from what I would have done of a 10, 30, 60 pile to a 5, 30, 65 pile. First turn was done at day 6, second turn at day 10, and the third turn, day 14. Total number of turns was 3, but it just barely made it. Your highest temperatures are with just before your first turn. After that, the temperatures in your pile are slowly going down as the food is being burned up. With this one, it's just made it above the 30, 55, up to about 56, and then managed to hold that. I think it went up to 57. Held it for these 72 hours and just made it. The highest temperatures at this pile reach were actually 67 degrees.
I'm just going to pause this a minute. There's somebody who's drawing on the screen, Infinix something. James, will you please disable the ability for that to happen? It's quite distracting. Thank you.
Okay.
Now, knowing that it just snuck through, and I was using black soldier fly frass again and putting in a little bit of horse manure, and the temperatures were much colder, I decided to put in an almost equal amount of black soldier fly frass, and then some horse manure, fresh green grass clippings for the greens, and then wood chips for spreading dry spawn leaves for the browns. This pile was 19, 33, and 49, so 19%. Party food, 33% greens and 49% browns, roughly. I turned this pile on day 5, 8, 12, and 16 because even after the third term, it was still heating up. So I did that to make sure it didn't go anaerobic. And the highest temperature it reached was 75, and it managed all of its 3 terms within 12 days. The pile before was 14 days. So now I was getting a kind of a hang of what black soldier fly was doing. For the third pile, I put 9% black soldier fly frass and 5.6% comfrey leaves. In total, it was 15% of party food, 30% of greens, as you can see in the list there, and 55% of the browns. And this pile also behaved quite differently. The first turn was done on day 6, the second turn on day 10, the third day was on 14. Actually, it behaved just like the original pile, the first pile. I didn't have to put any chimneys in it. I didn't have any extra days of turning. Total turns were 3, and the highest temperature reached was 69. So this was a very successful pile. You're probably wondering why I put in 9% of frass and 5% only with the first pile. So there are a couple of considerations I took into account. I got in touch with the person who supplied the black soldier fly frass to find out what the carbon to nitrogen ratio was, and found that it was quite different from the first batch that I had got. It was lower in nitrogen, so I used more of it. The temperature was also cooler. So based on that judgment, I made that new recipe, and it was quite successful. So think about quality, quantity, etc. of your materials. And this goes to show how important they are. So let's have a look at them. So this is the 17 weeks, 7 weeks, the 7 weeks. That's what they look like. You can see from the 17-week compost, it's really broken down now. It looks a little bit like soil, actually. whereas those that are 7 weeks or 10 weeks younger, you can still see big chunky bits, and then you can't really tell the difference between pile 2 and pile 3.
And there we are. That's it. You guys have all the magic. You have all the tricks. You have all the information. I have no more information to give you about compost making. Do we have any questions about this, the third section here? Any questions? I did see somebody say, what does earth smell like? Yeah, earth. Yeah, and somebody, Derek says, like when it's about to rain. And you know what that smell is? They say that that is the smell of geosmins. It's a smell that is released by microbes. So earth smells like microbes. That sounds nasty, doesn't it? But I think it does. Earth and the smell of rain is made by microbes. So earth smells like microbes. Do you all feel confident that you can make your compost? Have you all learned something today? Derek seems very happy. That's great. What about everybody else? Do you all feel like super? Thank you. Thank you for showing me. Because the idea here was that archiving this material, or what I call immortalizing the material in such a way that you can go back to it over and over and over again. You're not expected to remember all of this all in one go because it's a lot of information. But if you follow this step by step, and this is what I was taught. And when I was going through, the April class, honestly, you really did put me to task. You came into the bionutrient conference, and then you started asking some very big questions. And it made me realize that my compost making also really did need an upgrade, and I could not bring my old compost making class into this class with you. So I'm really, really glad that the process has pushed me to put this masterclass together and to be able to put it on and to put it online so that you can access it, and anyone can access it anywhere. And you can share it, you can download it, you can share it, you can point people to it. But more importantly than the watching it and the sharing, etc., is the doing. I want to see you making this compost. And actually, I'm wondering here, James, you can tell me, yes, he is. Just one second. Okay, so I want to show you something. Just very quickly. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? It's here. I'm going to quickly just take you back to show you. And then, James, I would like you to check if, one second. If Ibrahim is in the group, is he still here? Is he still in the
Ibrahim Wairagu from Uganda.
No. I'm talking about Ibrahim.
Mwangi.
No, there's Ibrahim. Well, I'm just going to show you that Ibrahim in, one second. Sorry, not Ibrahim. Sorry, I've made a mistake with the name here. But I can see that he's not actually in the class here. But I wanted to show you very quickly that based on this video, using some adaptations, somebody actually did this yesterday. They made their compost yesterday in Somaliland. Okay, I think we should all give him, this was Ahmed, and we should all give him a really big round of applause, okay? He literally methodically followed the entire process on the video, and he's made his first pile. So the first pile from our learning is out there in Somaliland, and hopefully he's going to share with us all those dates and times and all the changes that it's going to go through. And the idea was that if we can learn it from on a video, then wow, what else do we need? What else do we need apart from sharing what went right, what was different, what did we use to improvise, what did we use for our different ingredients, how did we solve certain problems? Because when I've shared those recipes there, and you can look at it and say, okay, I'm going to try exactly the same as Su's recipes. I'm going to do 5% of this, 18% of this, whatever those recipes are at the end there, you might find that it doesn't exactly work like what I did, because my ingredients might have been slightly different, or the temperatures would have been slightly different, but you might get close to that. But let's share those stories so that we can all learn and see what's happening in different parts of the country. The more we share, the less people have got to, the more we can leapfrog, the faster we can all move forward, right? I like that one, Boo. Yes, it's time to do it practically, and it's time to share. So we've come to the end of the class. I'm just going to read, or the end of the session. I was 2 years old that I learned the smell of rain. Yeah, exactly. Geosmins, you should look that up. And then Carmelo says, to have good greens, are there certain grasses like Brachiaria, Napier, Bombastic, etc. that you use, or do you just use lawnmower and gather the mulch ones? I just use my lawn, and I use, other green plants and things that are around. So if we're clipping, doing any trimming, weeds, anything that might be in an abundance, overgrown. And that's why we shouldn't be so afraid of weeds, because weeds are great greens, really, really great greens. They keep the power going in your compost, okay? Sue, could you remind me the name of the fern like azolla that you use? So what I had was called Salvinia, and it's a pond weed that when it gets out there in the pond, it really takes over everything. It's a bit of a disaster sometimes, but I realized that I can now grow stuff in my pond for my compost and put that on my vegetables. Okay, everyone. So we can give you all microphones and all of your cameras. You can put your cameras on. Thank you all for staying. It's been a long time, an hour almost and 45 minutes, an hour and 40 something minutes. You've done really well. I really hope that you feel inspired and you feel empowered and you feel ready to go and make some really good quality compost. I'm counting on you, and I'm just waiting for your stories. No more of Sue's old, I don't want anyone to come to me and say, I made the lasagna like this, because we don't do lasagna anymore. Lasagna compost doesn't give you the results that you get, the biological results that you get with this sort of compost. And anyone who's making compost and wants me to do a sample of your compost, send it to me. I won't charge you. I will look through it and I will give you an analysis of what is in your compost so that you can see, are you actually growing the right biology? And you're probably wondering what next. And after this, we'll do a masterclass in making compost extracts and making compost teas, because those two things we can only do once we've got our compost right. And once you've got your compost right, and even the way I taught how to make extracts, I've had an upgrade and I want to share that with you. So we'll be doing that for the next masterclass. 1+5 has got your hand up. Let's take a comment, a question, something from there. Look at this group. There's still 60 of you here all this time later. Wow. I'm blown away. Very, very cool. So chuffed. 1+, do you want to, you've got a microphone. Go ahead.
Yeah, evening.
Evening.
Evening. Can you hear me? My network is not right.
Can hear you perfectly.
Okay, I sent my compost and you told me it was not yet ready. So how about it? Although it's moist.
So was yours, which one was yours?
I'm Joseph. I sent the one which was, you told me the grass is not yet broken and you told
Yes,
me
yes, yes.
it's not yet.
What I
Yes.
would advise you to do, Joseph, based on what you've learned now, my impression when I just looked at that compost is that it might be too wet and too dense, and it might be going anaerobic because there's a lot of grass in there and the grass is staying very close together and they're long pieces of grass. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yes.
So I would turn it, I would do the water test, I would turn it and aerate it as you've seen. You don't have to do the hole in the middle and everything yet because it was not made in that fashion, but I would really give it a good turn to get all that grass inside and in there breaking down. Don't let it get too wet. I think it might be wet enough, but it does need to be fluffed up and aerated so that the air can get in, so that the right biology can breathe and continue breaking down the pile.
Okay, I get the mistake because it's too wet, in fact.
Yeah.
So I continue turning, then see what happens.
You know what I would do if I were you?
Yes.
I would look at making a brand new compost, and I would use that as some of the browns in my new one and follow this new system to make a new one. That's what I do.
Okay, okay, I'll do that.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Thank you, thank you.
All right. So to everybody else, good night. God bless you all. Have a lovely rest of the week and into the weekend. And I'm looking forward to seeing your compost, your new compost piles. Bye.
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 Hello.